I encountered Katie on Twitter, where she was continuously beaming good ideas into the world. And I thought that we need something that is a bit more inspirational also for this meeting today, for the idea of how to surf the renovation wave. So without further ado, I would like to give her the floor to inspire us a little bit. She's the author of a book that's called How to Save the World. So how to save the world. We think we can do that with heat pumps, but I know that you have quite a few other ideas in the context of gamification, making things more fun, making things colorful. So please, Katie, start with your inspirational talk, and then we have a few minutes afterwards to discuss and maybe also reflect on what you think about heat pumps.
Okay, great. Thanks, Thomas. Can you hear me and see me okay? You can? Okay, I'm just going to do a share screen now and go through my my presentation on how we can add gamification to heat pumps. So all right, how's it looking?
Great.
It's all good?
Good.
Yep.
Yes.
Okay. Okay. So everybody knows where just so you know my background and where I come from. I'm an environmental engineer. I used to work on commercial buildings as a green building engineer doing Green Star or LEED certifications. And then I moved into creative production, software design, and then into looking at the behavioral psychology of how we influence people to do environmental stuff. I realized after this long career in sustainability that while we have so many technical solutions of how we want to change the world or save the world, often the barrier is psychological, how you actually get people to take action. And in this case, it's how you actually get people to do a commercial or a residential renovation. How do we get, and the barrier is actually in the mind. And so now that's what I specialize in my design. And so I've got this presentation where I go through how to add these gamification and these tips of the psychology of influence to these big and very difficult environmental problems that we work on. So we're all here because we want to change the world. Maybe some people are here because you just want to sell heat pumps, but I think most of us are here because we're here, you know, trying to deal with these really big issues. And people approach this in all different sorts of ways. How do we influence people? You might be involved in, you know, a book or building a social network. You might think maybe we should make a documentary about heat pumps. Maybe we should build a social network, or we could write a blog article. Let's produce a report, maybe an art project, media coverage. People come up with all these different ideas of how do we influence people to take action? But we have to ask the overarching question, which is, are we actually doing anything? Which is, are we actually making measurable change? And you'd be amazed many people work on trying to create social and environmental change, and their projects don't actually make any measurable change on the ground. And that's because that's this phenomenon, which is that people have often thought that if we educate people about issues, if we educate people about climate change, if we educate people about air pollution or about the whales or whatever, that education will lead to people being concerned. You've probably heard, if people just knew about it, if people only cared, we just have to get people to care. Well, the thing is that people often are educated and they do care, but this is where it becomes difficult. The education and the concern just doesn't lead to action. And this phenomenon is called the value action gap. It's been heavily studied by behavioral psychologists. There's a long Wikipedia page on it with a lot of references. And it is just that education and emotional concern just aren't big drivers to take action. And this is a big mistake that the whole movement of people trying to get people to take action have been making. And we've got to see the human mind kind of like this thing that has a whole lot of doors going into it. And we can't just assume that we know what is going to make people, you know, go through to the motivational core of the human mind that's going to get them to install the heat pump or do the solar or take the energy efficiency action or whatever. And this is really where my focus over the last few years has been. And I put it together in this book. It was so fascinating. I found all these case studies that showed these really interesting and revealing insights. Like, for example, that, you know, financial incentives actually don't work as well as perhaps comparing you against your neighbors while everyone's trying to look for the financial incentive. Little examples like this. So if you're interested in this stuff, you can grab a copy of the book. And it naturally segues into gamification design that I do now. So I'm just going to go through a few tips, a few case studies of my work of how I've implemented this around environmental data, and a few of the theories that I use that I think can be helpful when you're looking at like, how do we actually get people to change? And the first thing is just looking deeply into the data and how we present this data. Often the data about environmental issues is hidden, and we don't know what it is, we can't see it, and people are can be very fuzzy-minded about what the data they're trying to change is about. And this was interesting. I love this quote from Bill Gates. This is from his 2013 annual letter to the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. And he says, "You can achieve amazing progress if you set a clear goal and find a measure that will drive progress towards that goal. This may seem pretty basic, but it is amazing to me how often it is not done right, and how hard it is to get right." And when you really start looking into the measurement around environmental issues and whether that data is being shown to people, everybody working on it, and it's been continually updated and improved, you'll find that this is an incredibly salient message. And it is really profound about how often people aren't really looking into the numbers of what they're trying to change. And so this brings us to this issue that if we really do know the numbers and we really do show everybody the numbers, will it work? And so there's this field of research called the disclosure of data, or it's called targeted transparency or smart disclosure. And there's many case studies showing that this can powerfully create change. And the biggest example of this is this thing that happened in America called the EPA's toxic release inventory. And it happened in the late 1990s after the Bhopal disaster in India. And the EPA wanted to get a sense of how much chemicals in the United States. And so they asked everybody, not everybody, all the major corporations in America, to just simply disclose to them how much toxic chemicals they were using. They just wanted to do some accounting to figure out what was going on. But then something kind of magical happened. Within under 5 years of this happening, toxic chemical usage in the United States went down by 45%. And now if you're looking at like 45%, if you were going to get landfill down by 45% or CO2 emissions down by 45%, this is a huge number in a very small amount of time. And there's case study after case study showing that when the numbers got put out there, just that effect alone started to really affect change. And there's smaller examples too, like this one, which is just in a college dorm showing people a sign of the amount of paper that was in the recycling bin. And there's many studies like this because they're quite easy to do in universities. This caused a 77% increase in the amount of paper that was put in the recycling bin. It's a really simple mechanism of using data feedback. And here's just a few examples of different ways that you can use data. This is a bit broader than heat pumps, but it's really fun to start thinking about different mechanisms of gathering data. For example, this one's a light that shows you how much electricity you're using. These satellites are from a company called Planet Labs that photographs the entire Earth every single day. And they're here in San Francisco. You may have seen these bike counters around. Sorry if my all the people are in the way down here. Using LiDAR, there's a whole lot of different images you can get through aircraft. This one's called an Atmos necklace. What the air quality is as you walk around, and everybody's being tracked on this app. This is another one I worked with, which is putting scales on garbage trucks so we can actually know how much garbage each individual household is producing. And then thermal photography, which is something I've been working on. This is just a few examples, and there are just so many sensors we can use to sense so many different things and to give us better granular insight into our environmental footprint. And I think this is just the beginning of a really exciting new age of getting data and building this kind of like cybernetic mechanism. And so I'll just go through a few examples of ideas, case studies, some real projects, some are concept designs of how I think we can implement this. Like, for example, if we drive down the freeway, we don't know how much fuel cars are using. There's a big push towards EVs right now. But, maybe we could see how much fuel we were using, and then we could all collectively have this in our consciousness in the zeitgeist to try and get this number down. What about how much electricity or carbon dioxide the city is using? Can it be on a billboard so we can all work together to try and get this number down? This is one I thought of, how do we apply this to getting people to eat less animal foods and more plant foods? This is an app called the V-Score that takes a menu, calculates the ratio of plant calories to animal calories, and then gives you this star rating and this percentage score. It's just based on disclosing the data and adding these gamification design things. This is a billboard. You can put a sensor, the sensors aren't that expensive, on the side of a billboard, and then you can show people what the air quality is at any point in time. Here's a smaller one. Why can't these be all over the city, right? This is another one showing the carbon dioxide emissions from electricity. Can include gas too, so we can really nudge heat pump installation along. So if you're walking down the street of any city in Europe or America, you know exactly in real time how much carbon dioxide emissions are being put out. And this can be used by all the different groups who are working on energy efficiency and decarbonization, and to all of us to try and get this number down. And, you know, we can make little ones for buildings. This is another project I'm working on. And this is what they would look like. Why can't every building have one of these? And then, bingo, what's the easiest way to get the number down? Heat pump. This is a more creative idea of how to do it for, you know, an art installation that communicates data as an orb that changes color. And one I've recently been working on, just trying to add this color coding for a project called Energy Lollipop, which adds this color coded, this color scale to the amount of two that the on your grid is. Now this data is hidden deep within the California ISO website. It's just a black line on a white chart. It's hard to get a sense of whether it's high or low because of the color. And once you add color to it, it just becomes so much more salient, and you can really tell how bad the CO2 emissions are at any point in time. You know, we can do this with satellite imagery. This is the tree cover of a city, and then we can calculate that using GIS software. Thermal maps of the urban heat island effect. There's all this interesting stuff we can do. Outdoor screens. And this is the one that I think could be most relevant to heat pump installation. And it would be interesting if you could think if any of this is being done or any of this data is being collected in the industry. This is something I worked on for solar panel installations. Now, but it could be applied to, you know, how many people have a heat pump and how many people have solar. Now, if you just look at Google Satellite View, you can see all of the solar panels. You can see them here. There they are. So that's really easy to actually map up. You can actually do it by hand using any mapping software, and we can see which households have solar, right? And one thing that is also interesting about these is when you look at the maps, you'll notice that that they come in clusters. Like once you see one solar panel here, you'll notice that the neighbors around them, and this happens over and over again, showing that, you know, change happens through people influencing other people. But this is where it gets interesting of how we can apply gamification design. So I went into a program called Mapbox. It's just a nicer version of Google Maps for making applications. And you can see there's a cluster here of solar panels. And this is real data. I've looked at the Google Satellite View, and I mapped it out in these blocks in my neighborhood in Potrero Hill in San Francisco. And so what I did is I thought, well, if we want to get everybody on this block to put on solar panels, let's give everybody like a white spot. Like it's like an empty badge that is somehow craving to be filled. And then we add a progress bar, like we know exactly how many homes have solar and don't. And then this main mechanism of the design, the central design feature is we want to get this progress bar filled up. We want to make sure every household has solar. So we can do this for heat pumps too. And then we ultimately get to the end there. And so everyone, when you get solar, you get a badge, you get a tick. Per block, you calculated the percentage. This block has 6.1% solar installed, and then there's a progress bar along here. So each block is sort of like almost like a football team in the bigger game, and each block is competing against every other block. And I've been thinking about how can we apply this type of mechanism to solar and heat pumps and also electric vehicles, so we can systematically go through household by household and make this change happen in a way that's fun, like a game. And there's simple things. This is another one I did for zero waste for the University of Santa Cruz, simple progress bar. Where are you at? Like, has anybody done a progress bar for heat pumps? How many households there are to go? How many households are done? Where are we? What percentage are we in terms of getting to this progress bar of getting every single household changed over? And, you know, this is another exciting way we can augment this using augmented reality, the Magic Leap glasses, where you can see sort of like a filter of a game world overlaid over the real world. What if we could see the carbon intensity of all of the buildings around us, or the air pollution through air pollution sensors? We can get really creative with this stuff. And so what I call this is Fitbit for the planet design. Like, this is the way I think about these problems. If I could have a Fitbit that told me all of the environmental mechanisms of the city and all of the buildings, what would that look like? And how could I make that fun and engaging to try and give people feedback to get them to do more environmentally friendly stuff? And so the next step is working on the goal. Now, again, this might sound really obvious. Do we have a goal? But a lot of projects, people haven't really thought very specifically about exactly how much carbon dioxide they want to, you know, take out of the grid, or, you know, out of the gas system. So when we work out from here to there, for example, this is how much we're producing now, this is how much we want to produce, we can develop a very systematic way of trying to go through that and figure out how to take that down. And everybody here is probably an engineer, and this probably sounds ridiculously obvious, but you'd be amazed that this is actually very rarely done. And I've spoken to a lot of people across, you know, not-for-profits and social impact startups, and this is kind of almost a revolutionary concept to them, and they're embarrassed when I bring it up that they haven't thought of it. But what this really interesting process happens when you start connecting these two dots is that you can start to harvest ideas from looking deep into your data. And while, you know, we're all probably engineers here thinking, oh, we've got a great solution, we all get stymied and stumped when we're like, how do we get people to ideas come in and the creativity comes in. We look at, this is where we're at here, this is where we want to go, and then looking deeply into this number to try and bring out ideas. Well, how do we get people to talk to their neighbors about it? You know, how do we get everybody on a street to do it? Like, how do we, you know, design our communications around it? Can we give people little cards and a stamp? This is where we have to start getting really creative into how to get people to do it. And when you look deeply into the numbers, this is something I really love to do, which is bringing measurement to the center of the creative process. We look into it and then we brainstorm and we brainstorm. And we brainstorm around this progress bar. How do we get the progress bar, you know, of all the changes we need to make happen along like that? And how do we creatively design that to get everybody excited about how to shift these numbers? And we can give people emojis. I love to use earth emojis in everything I do to make people feel good about the change they make. And this other step that's in the book is, now this is getting sort of outside of the of just like technical engineering and behavioral science. But I think it's important in a world that's often mired in doom and there's really strong messages of climate tragedy that can be very frightening, that we keep our dream alive of why we're here and to try and like share this dream. And there's a wonderful quote by Antoine Saint-Exupéry, you might have seen it before. It says, if you want to build a ship, do not drum up the men to gather wood, divide work and give orders. Instead, teach them to yearn for the vast and endless sea. So I ask people, what is the vast and endless sea you're asking people to join you on? Sure, you want to get people to install this or install that or spend money on that, but we have to spark this dream of the new world we're creating, and that's where the real power is, in trying to in getting people to join a movement. And you may have seen this architect, it's amazing, sort of futuristic eco-city pictures, and I love these pictures because they inspire me for the type of new world that we can create. And maybe it doesn't need to be fancy eco-cities. Maybe it's just Michelle Obama growing vegetables for school children. And this is one I did up of a city. And it's really important that we do create this vision, because now we're going to go into like the behavioral science of what all this means, because people unconsciously imitate things. And so if you send a message that somebody is doing something bad, like we see pictures of litter and it says don't litter, it actually has the opposite, it can have the opposite effect. So for example, I made this ad up. This is a fake ad I made for Mercedes-Benz. And it says, it has got this ugly guy and it says, women ignore him, but it's actually because he drives a terrible car. Now, the thing is, Mercedes-Benz does not do ads like this. What they do is ads like this. They have obviously all sat around a meeting, a table. They've thought deeply about what males want, what the true male is. And he wants a black sports car with 3 supermodels wearing evening dresses cleaning his car. I'm assuming that this taps right into the ultimate dream of men. They really know what they're doing, but they haven't shown you the world that we don't want. They show you the world that we do want, and we need to get better at doing this so we can bring people onto our movement and often get people excited about things that really aren't glamorous or exciting. Insulation and heat pumps aren't really sexy things, and we have to somehow make this part of something of a bigger story. And this is an example of why you don't want to use negative messaging. This is this forest of petrified rocks in Arizona, and they had this sign up that said, "Your heritage is being vandalized every day by thieves." And what this does is tells the unconscious mind that everybody is stealing rocks, right? So they changed the sign to say, "Please don't remove rocks from the park," and the rock by 50%, just because they tell people not to do it, instead of just saying, like, when you say everybody else is doing this bad thing, people just will copy the bad thing. And one thing that you can do in terms of linking this all together is this process I go over in the book, which is where you work out the measurable goal you want, and then you just idea storm, right? If you wanted to get quadruple the amount of heat pumps installed, you wanted to get it up to 50% or whatever, you know, you just sit there and you just like harvest ideas, and you go, and these type of processes aren't taught in sustainability. I didn't learn this in environmental engineering school. We don't, when we have conferences, we don't do these things. We don't dig into our imagination to try and bring out ideas. And we need to start setting aside times like 4 or 5 hours to really do these sort of deep creative imagination processes to come up with these the ideas that we need. And just moving into actions. So how we actually get people to take action, you know, you isolate the behavior. A lot of people in sustainability, they're like, oh, like, here's 100 tips to go green. You should use a plastic and get a bike and build a house. And it's really not very well thought through. They think people can just adopt 100 behaviors at once. We get very specific about the behavior and then design it up from there. And a great way to do that is pledges. Like, you could do something on a street and it says, you know, would you like to sign a pledge to, you know, switch over to a heat pump in the next 12 months? You get people to write a pledge. This is one of the most powerful behavioral mechanisms out there, and it's totally free and anyone can do it. You don't need to write a line of code, right? They did this with engine idling in Canada, where parents pick their kids up from school. They all leave their car on and create this big cloud of air pollution when they're picking up their kids. And they put up a sign that said, like this, turn your engine off. It didn't work. So, okay, I accidentally pressed the button. So the number came up earlier in the story. But anyway, so then they hired all these volunteers. They went around to each individual car and said, you know, we're trying to reduce air pollution in the school. I was wondering if you would like to sign a pledge. Basically, would you like to promise to turning your car engine off while you're waiting? And then the parents agreed. And then bingo, the car idling went down by 73%. It's a power of making a promise to somebody else. And I did this in my zero waste meetup in San Francisco. Here, I got everybody to fill out these signs. I thought I'll just, you know, experiment in the field with this. And it was really amazing. I instantly felt really guilty and made sure I went and bought my toothbrush. This guy started sending me pictures for weeks of all of his coffee cups that he'd stopped using now. And I saw this guy a year later at a conference and he was like, I'm still making my own toothpaste, you know. This stuff is really powerful, and it really works. And then there's this next thing is like just looking into the environment. People often come up with these elaborate ways of, we want to, you know, make up some big documentary about stuff, but without looking at the actual environment. Like, okay, if you want to get people to use less plastic, install a water refill station. Maybe you should just put a sign on the door to get people to remember their bags. I did this in my house. I just put up this coat hanger and I put all the bags on it, and then everyone in my house started using their reusable bags. It's just like simple things like that of thinking through it. When you start to think of it as a behavior, you start to think of everything differently. And this is a really interesting example that can be relevant, possibly relevant to heat pumps and different sort of environmental behaviors. So this study was done, it's called foot in the door technique, where a group of researchers went around to houses and they said, wanted to test whether they were these two different signs. So they went round and they asked if they would like to put in this really big drive carefully sign, huge sign that would obscure the whole yard. And almost everybody said no to the big sign. They went round to another group of households and they asked to put in a small sign. And most of the households actually said, yes, we would be happy to put in a small sign that said drive carefully. And now this is when it gets really interesting. They went round to the houses who had the small sign 3 months later, and they said, would you like to now put in the really big sign? And 76% of the households now agreed to the big sign. So this is really critical to understanding how to get people to do environmentally friendly stuff. That if you can get people to just take one bite of the cookie, just one little thing, if you can get them to take one bite of the vegan chicken nugget, that will enable them to perhaps, go fully vegan somewhere down the line. And if you can get people to engage, spending like $3,000 or $4,000 on a major home renovation is a big deal. But if you can get people to do one small thing, like maybe it's changing a light globe, or engaging in their environmental data about their house, they may be primed for you to come back later and then ask for the bigger thing. Another one is social norms. This is basically everybody copies everybody else. Again, very powerful. This is a popular study that was done on hotel room towel usage. So they put up this little hanger on the towels with a sign that said 75% of guests who stayed in this room number, and getting this language is important. So they say 75%, which means most of everybody else. They didn't say like 3%. They said most of everybody else who stayed in this room, which is your room. So it means the people are kind of similar to you, participated in this new resource saving program by using their towels more than once. All right. So instead of please use the towels, something, please use the towels for the environment, doesn't work that well. So this got 29% increase than if they just changed the wording that said, please use the towels. And when you think about that over a major hotel chain, this is a really big environmental number. Now, it's used again in the shower. So this study was done on men, young male college students who take a shower after playing sport. They put up a sign that said, please save water and turn off the shower while soaping up. And again, the sign did nothing, right? So what they did was they hired an actor and they asked the actor to turn the shower off to save water while he was soaping up his body. And it worked. Then 49% of all the other young men copied his behavior. So then they hired, it was so successful, they hired a second actor, and then it shot up to 67%. So this is showing that if we want people to do stuff, we have to model the behavior and get people to copy the behavior. This is inherently why humans do stuff, because they're copying the people around them. And it's about this concept called agency that I'm really into when we're talking about how to bring data into this. So agency means, you probably know what it means, but when talking in this context, it's like motivation or empowerment, like I'm empowered to affect the numbers. And I think the best dashboard display I've seen of this sense of agency is on the Prius dashboard, where it's really immediate. You're literally in the driver's seat, affecting how much carbon emissions your car is putting out. And so we look at how the Toyota Prius does it and think, well, how can we do this for what we work on? How can we create these very engaging real-time feedback loops of data and really engage people's agency? Like, I feel like I can affect these numbers. That's the kind of code to crack. And we do it in speeding school zones. It doesn't need to be that high tech. Simple sensor tells you how fast you're going. Cars slow down by an average of 14% once they see these signs. And once we have granular data, we can compare people. This is where we really start getting into gamification design. How does my property compare to your property? My school compare to your school? My business compare to your business? You may have seen this company, O-Power, in America, that does this. They put this little chart comparing your electricity use to your neighbors, and they give you a smiley face. when you do great. They tried using a frowny face, but people got upset. So now you get no frowny face. You get one smiley face if you're doing good, and you get a double smiley face. So we want to use more positive feedback and not use too much negative feedback. People are very sensitive about negative feedback about their environmental footprint. So this gets an average of down by 3%. It might not sound like a big number, but this also isn't that difficult to do, to add into electricity bills. This is a kind of O-Power on steroids design I did up for apartments. You know, we can put everyone in an apartment on a leaderboard. Comparing people can be very powerful. It doesn't need to be high tech. Greenpeace does this with the major electronics. They put it on display. It's kind of a fun, engaging display. It gets a lot of press coverage. And you can add color and comparison like that. Or you can do it with lights, with LED lights and with electronics. This is how I've been doing it in a Chrome extension we've been building called Energy Lollipop. We calculate every household's CO2 emissions, multiplying the kilowatt hours by the CO2 of the grid, because the CO2 is different all throughout every 24 hours, adding in the gas there as well, giving every household their own CO2 score. But the main driver is adding color. We add color and social comparison to that, and it's very psychologically powerful. Then you can add star ratings. This is vehicle safety emissions. Gamification stuff doesn't need to be out there and super hipster and cool. It can be very conservative, like the government putting out car safety ratings. You've got star ratings, you've got color, you've got a leaderboard. This is how car safety rating is done now, and it saves thousands of lives a year. And this is, you've probably seen this one being in Europe of vehicle emissions. Our one in the United States is not nearly as good. It's still in the dark ages, us over here in America. You can also add behavior charts. This is something I just don't see done enough. You know, can we get people to commit to something that they want to do, like a 30-day challenge, a 7-day challenge? And then you give people a sticker, just like when you're a child, to try and get people to start changing their actions. And it can be done. It doesn't need to be done with stickers. It can also be done with software. This is one I did for a solar installation company. And when people do it, we want to give them good feedback, badges, and awards, some way of feeding this thing called the reward center of the brain. This is something not that many people know about outside of people that study brains and behavior, which is the brain wants a cookie. It wants to be rewarded. You want to be told good job. You want to get, you know, some food. You want to be warm. You want something that just tells the brain, yes, I want more of this. And us as sustainability practitioners, we need to get better at feeding the reward center of the brain when people do something good. And our movement has not done a lot of this. We tend to feed the other side of the brain, which is the fear and shame mechanism, sort of frightening people with climate change. But we really need to figure out better ways of rewarding people, telling people they're doing a great job, giving them a smiley face, this type of thing, because that will encourage, yeah, there we go. It's brain wants a cookie, brain wants a smiley face. And brain wants you to tell you that you are doing a good job. So my friend worked on this study with Wikipedia, and all they did with this was give Wikipedia editors, people that volunteer their time to the pages, a tiny little digital flower, right? And it said, thank you for helping edit Wikipedia. It went up by 20%. Tiny interventions of these badges and these positive feedback can lead to these big results. And if they're done over millions of people, can have a really big environmental effect. And this is the last one. But possibly one of the most powerful effects. So don't think it's too silly, which is using emotive animals. There's been multiple studies showing that when you show an animal and the animal smiles and gives you feedback, that this has more of a positive effect than all of the other stuff I've just been through. So this one study that was done with an owl found that students did 23% better when the owl was smiling versus the owl was not smiling, because these positive mechanisms of seeing a friendly smiling face make us feel peaceful and relaxed, and we're able to absorb more complex information. And there's been other studies done on energy efficiency, which I should add into the presentation. And all of this is ultimately getting down to this concept of causality. What is the causal mechanism for people making change? We often think that it's money, that everything is just a financial decision. It's not. People make decisions of all different sorts of things based on what their community is doing, based on something that's interested them, based on something that's novel. mainly because they're copying the people around them. Part of it's money, but there's a whole lot of other stuff going on. And so getting really shrewd, really scientific about what is that causal mechanism that makes the person do that thing. And once we know what it is, really to sort of flesh out that as a campaign and, you know, hopefully really start making change happen across millions of people. So this is the end of my presentation. I hope I didn't go too much over time. And ultimately, the final slide is this picture of the prism. You've probably seen this on the Pink Floyd cover. It's where you put light through it and it refracts out of it. And I love this picture because I think it's a metaphor for us in the world doing in a way that we create change. We all have a creative force in us. We don't talk about creativity and imagination that much when it comes to, you know, commercial green buildings and energy efficiency and us all being engineers, but we all have a creative energy in us. And I think we need to find the way, essentially the prism for what we can put our creative energy through it. And that when we can do that and we get this kind of prism right, we can kind of like, it will refract our unique talent, skill to the world, kind of like a big rainbow, and change everything. And that's our purpose. That's why we're here, to do this with our life. So that's it. Thanks for watching. I hope this was sort of fun and different in the scheme of energy efficiency engineering. If you want to stay in touch, here's my details, my email. As Thomas said, I'm pretty active on Twitter. I have a podcast and a book. I also do freelance design. I specialize in energy efficiency software design. And you can you know, contact me or have a look at all of my work. I would very excited to work on the gamification of heat pumps, which I'm starting to do now.
Katie, thank you very much. This was great. You saw me laughing. I left my camera on. I enjoyed it a lot. At least I feel very much inspired. Being myself a starting user of sensors of sorts at the moment. I did some Raspberry Pi experiments with a CO2 sensor for my own house. I hope that this was inspirational. I have to say that we have no time left. So you made perfect use of your time. I think you brought great examples. I followed the chat also. There's a few people saying, yeah, let's pick this up. So I do think there's going to be something coming out of it. And I share fully with you this idea of showing the positive future that we have, the perspective that these energy efficiency can give to us. You said in the phone call that we had that you're asked more and more at the moment to do things about heat pumps. I think I didn't catch that properly, where this relates to what you said in the presentation. Can you just enlighten me on that one?
Yeah, so we've been developing this concept called Energy Lollipop, which shows the carbon intensity of the grid. So we can get the data from the California ISO, and it's great for gamification design because we can get the real-time data, which really, you know, can help make gamification fun. And so I've been pitching it to all of the CCAs and the energy utilities around here, and everyone said, oh, we're not really doing energy efficiency anymore because we've got a whole lot of solar. You know, we don't really need people to put on more solar, but we're just trying to get everyone to do heat pumps. So can you try and apply this to people doing getting heat pump installations? There's a big push in California right now to get off gas, to do electrification. Every single utility and the smaller CCAs, which you probably know about, it's their main focus right now. They're trying to get people onto EVs and get people off gas. It's like the big thing. So I'm having to kind of convert our Energy Lollipop to being the concept to being more focused or largely centrally focused on getting people to switch off their homes off gas.
But this is the perfect handover to our last session today. So I release you, Katie. Thank you very much. I hope to stay in touch, and that this is only the start of a long journey.